The first thing I remember is the sound of running feet echoing across polished hospital floors, sharp and urgent like thunder chasing me through a dream I could not escape. Someone was shouting in Persian, another voice calling orders, machines beeping in frantic rhythm, yet everything felt strangely far away, as if I was sinking beneath deep water while the world continued above the surface without me. I tried to open my eyes, but my body refused to respond. My chest felt heavy, trapped between breaths that would not come. Fear rose inside me, sudden and raw, the kind of fear that strips away dignity and titles and leaves only a human soul begging to survive. Only hours earlier, I had stood beneath crystal chandeliers smiling for diplomats, a Saudi princess representing honor and tradition, trained since childhood never to show weakness. And now I could not even move my fingers. Someone pressed hard against my chest. Pain flashed, then faded. A voice said my name again, louder this time, but it stretched unnaturally, slowing as if time itself were breaking apart. The hospital lights blurred into white streaks above me. I wanted to pray, but no words formed. All my memorized prayers disappeared, leaving only silence inside my mind. Then the sounds began to fade. One by one, the voices dissolved until only a long mechanical tone remained. I heard someone whisper, something that sounded final, and though I could not understand every word, I felt its meaning settle over me like cold air. They believed I was dying. Panic should have consumed me, yet something unexpected happened. The fear stopped. Not gradually, but instantly, like a door closing. The weight in my chest vanished. The pain disappeared. Even the awareness of my body slipped away, and suddenly there was only quiet. It was not emptiness. It was peace, deeper than sleep, deeper than anything I had ever known. I realized I could see again, but not through my eyes. Below me, doctors surrounded a woman lying motionless on a hospital bed. Tubes and wires covered her body. Her face looked pale, unfamiliar, until recognition struck me with strange calmness. It was me. I watched without terror as one doctor checked my pulse again and shook his head slowly. Another adjusted the machine beside the bed. The long tone continued, unwavering. Someone said softly, "She's gone." The words echoed, but they did not hurt. Instead, I felt myself moving upward, gently pulled away from the room as if carried by invisible hands. The hospital walls dissolved into brightness, not harsh or blinding, but warm and alive. Light surrounded me, and within it was a feeling I struggle even now to describe. I felt known completely. Every hidden thought, every doubt I had buried since childhood, every question I had feared to speak, seemed visible, yet there was no accusation. My entire life I had believed that standing before God would mean judgment and terror. But what filled me instead was overwhelming peace. I felt lighter than air, free from expectations, free from fear, free from the constant pressure to be perfect. Memories appeared around me like living scenes. My childhood reciting verses late into the night. My teachers warning about punishment. My mother reminding me that honor mattered more than happiness. The quiet loneliness behind palace walls where obedience replaced affection. And I saw myself smiling publicly, while silently wondering why God felt distant no matter how faithfully I prayed. Each memory passed through the light and softened, as if healed simply by being seen. Then I sensed a presence. Someone was there with me. I could not yet see him clearly, but I felt awareness directed toward me, gentle and steady. The light seemed to breathe with life. A thought entered my mind that did not belong to me, yet felt perfectly understood. "You are safe." The words carried warmth unlike anything human, Tears rose within me, even though I had no physical body to cry with. Safe was a word I had rarely felt in my life, despite guards, wealth, and status. Here there was no fear of failure, no need to perform, no weight of expectation, only peace. The presence moved closer, and the light deepened, revealing a figure forming within it. My heart filled with longing, recognition without explanation, as though my soul already knew him before my mind could understand. Just as his face began to come into focus, a violent force pulled me backward. Sound crashed into existence. Pain exploded in my chest. Air burned into my lungs as I gasped violently. Voices shouted again, louder than before. Hands held me down as machines beeped rapidly. Someone exclaimed that my heartbeat had returned. My eyes opened to the hospital ceiling, bright and ordinary, yet everything felt different. A doctor leaned over me, disbelief written across his face, whispering that I had been gone for 3 minutes. But they did not know what had happened in those minutes. They thought death had almost taken me. The truth was far stranger. Death had opened a door. And on the other side, I had encountered a presence that would soon change everything I believed about God, about faith, and about the future awaiting a nation I had never imagined would become part of my destiny. Because the moment my heart stopped in Tehran was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a truth I could never again deny. My name is Aliyah Ar-Rahman, and when the story you just heard began, I was 32 years old, a daughter of Saudi royalty, raised inside walls that glittered like paradise but felt more like a carefully decorated cage. From the outside, my life appeared perfect. People saw elegance, wealth, influence, and honor. They saw a woman educated abroad, fluent in several languages, trained to smile with composure and speak with calculated grace. What they could not see was the quiet emptiness that followed me everywhere, even into rooms filled with servants and security guards. I was born into privilege, but privilege came with expectations heavier than chains. Every action represented my family. Every word reflected generations before me. Faith was not simply belief, it was identity, duty, and survival. My earliest memories are not of toys or laughter, but of recitation. I remember sitting cross-legged on patterned carpets, repeating verses until my throat hurt. My teacher correcting every mistake with stern patience. I learned early that obedience brought approval, and questions brought silence. When I asked why God felt distant, I was told faith meant submission, not understanding. So I learned to stop asking. As a child, I believed holiness meant fear. A fear of disappointing my parents, fear of dishonoring my name, fear of divine punishment waiting for unseen mistakes. By adolescence, I had memorized long passages perfectly, yet inside I felt strangely unknown, as if I were performing devotion rather than experiencing it. Publicly, I was praised as disciplined and devout. Privately, I lay awake wondering why prayer felt like speaking into emptiness. I watched others weep during worship while I repeated words carefully, hoping emotion would eventually arrive if I remained faithful enough. My mother often reminded me that women in our family carried responsibility differently from men. We preserved reputation through modesty, silence, and obedience. Love, she said gently, was expressed through protection and structure. I believed her because I wanted to believe my life had meaning beyond appearance. Still, loneliness followed me even during celebrations. Banquets filled with laughter felt distant, conversations rehearsed, relationships cautious. Trust was rare when everyone around you served both as companion and observer. I learned to hide my true thoughts behind polite expressions long before adulthood. As I grew older, religion became intertwined with politics and public image. My prayers were sometimes photographed, my charity visits reported, my modest clothing analyzed as symbols rather than personal choices. The more visible my devotion became, the more invisible I felt inside myself. There were moments, brief and frightening, when I wondered if God saw me beyond my role. I buried those thoughts immediately, ashamed of their existence. And doubt was dangerous, not only spiritually but socially. One evening when I was 17, I overheard relatives discussing a distant cousin who had questioned religious teachings openly. The way his name was spoken, softly, cautiously, almost erased, taught me more than any sermon. Silence was safety. From then on, I perfected the art of agreement. Yet something inside me refused to disappear completely. Sometimes during late nights, I would stare through palace windows at the desert sky and whisper questions I never dared voice aloud. Who are you really, God? Why do I feel alone when I obey everything? Those whispers terrified me, and I always followed them with repentance, asking forgiveness for thoughts I could not control. Years passed, and my life moved according to expectation. Education, diplomatic appearances, and a preparation for marriage alliances that strengthened influence between families. People assumed I was confident because I spoke calmly in public, but confidence and peace are not the same thing. Beneath my composure lived a quiet exhaustion, as if I were constantly trying to reach something just beyond understanding. When I prayed, I felt watched rather than loved. When I succeeded, I felt relief rather than joy. I convinced myself this emptiness was normal, that spirituality required endurance more than intimacy. After my recovery in Tehran, many asked when my story truly began, and I realized it started long before my heart stopped. It began in those silent childhood questions I never answered. It began in the tension between devotion and longing. And perhaps it began with you listening now. If you have ever felt trapped between belief and fear, between tradition and truth, then maybe my story is not only mine. I share it because someone once needed courage to speak, and today that person is me. If this testimony reaches you, I gently ask you to stay with me, to subscribe, to like, to share, and to leave a comment so stories like this can find those searching quietly in the dark the way I once did. I never imagined I would speak publicly about faith, yet silence no longer feels like safety. The journey that changed everything started soon after, when I accepted an invitation to travel to Iran as part of a cultural delegation. Officially, it was diplomacy. Unofficially, it was another performance of faith and unity expected from someone with my name. I remember packing carefully, choosing modest clothing approved by advisors, and rehearsing conversations, reminding myself to represent strength. Nothing about the trip felt unusual at first. Yet on the flight to Tehran, an unease settled over me without explanation. A quiet pressure in my chest that felt different from anxiety. As the plane crossed into Iranian airspace, I looked out the window at unfamiliar mountains and felt a strange certainty that something waiting ahead would change my life forever, though I could not have imagined how completely everything I believed was about to unravel. Before Tehran, my life moved with precise predictability, every day shaped by expectation long before I woke each morning. Schedules arrived from assistants, appearances approved by advisors, conversations guided by invisible rules that governed royal life. And I learned to exist within structures so completely that spontaneity felt almost sinful. Faith, too, followed a schedule. Prayer times divided my day like checkpoints, reminders not only of devotion but of identity. Yet despite the discipline surrounding me, peace never arrived. Instead, a quiet tension lived beneath everything I did, as if I were constantly preparing for judgment I did not understand. Diplomatic responsibilities increased as I entered my 30s. I attended conferences, charity events, and interfaith discussions where religion was spoken of as unity and compassion. Cameras captured smiling moments, yet behind closed doors, conversations often centered on power, influence, and reputation. I began noticing the difference between what was proclaimed publicly and what was practiced privately. Mercy was preached, but fear controlled behavior. Honor was praised, but vulnerability was discouraged. I told myself this contradiction existed everywhere, not only in religion, yet the thought refused to leave me. Around that time, my family began discussing marriage more seriously. Suitors were introduced through formal channels, each meeting carefully supervised. The men were respectable, educated, and suitable in every measurable way. Still, during each conversation I felt invisible, as though the role mattered more than the person inside it. Marriage was described as stability, protection, continuation of legacy. No one asked whether love or spiritual connection existed. One evening, after meeting a particularly influential candidate, I returned to my room feeling suffocated. I performed evening prayer mechanically, at my forehead touching the ground, while my mind whispered questions I tried desperately to silence. Why does obedience feel empty? Why do I feel afraid instead of close to God? The guilt that followed those thoughts felt unbearable. I spent hours reciting additional prayers, hoping devotion would erase doubt. Instead, exhaustion settled deeper into my heart. Sleep became difficult. Late at night, when palace corridors fell silent, I began searching the internet on a private device hidden carefully from staff. At first, my searches were harmless. Philosophical discussions, writings about anxiety, questions about spiritual peace. Gradually, they became more dangerous. I typed questions I never dared speak aloud. Why does God feel distant? Can faith exist without fear? Each search ended the same way. I erased the history immediately, and my hands trembling as if someone might discover my curiosity and interpret it as betrayal. During those nights, I encountered testimonies from people describing personal relationships with God rather than obligation. Some mentioned Jesus in ways unfamiliar to me, speaking of love instead of judgment. I closed those pages quickly, frightened even by reading them. Still, something lingered. Their words carried warmth I could not dismiss. Memories from childhood resurfaced unexpectedly. I remembered being 8 years old, crying after making a small mistake during recitation, terrified that God would be angry with me. My teacher corrected me sternly, reminding me that precision honored God. I nodded obediently, yet inside I wondered whether God cared about fear more than love. That question returned years later with unsettling clarity. During preparations for the Tehran trip, I met an Iranian cleric invited to advise our delegation on cultural sensitivities. He was respected, intelligent, and spoke with calm authority. During a private conversation, I asked politely about spiritual unity between nations. His answer began gently but turned severe. He spoke about purity of belief and consequences awaiting those who strayed from truth. His words were not shouted. They were calm, certain, final. Yet something inside me recoiled. I realized I felt more afraid listening to him than inspired. When I asked whether God forgave sincere doubt, he paused before replying that doubt opened the door to destruction. The conversation ended respectfully, but his words followed me long after. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone staring at my reflection and wondering why the idea of questioning frightened religious leaders so deeply. If truth was strong, why fear questions? The thought shocked me, and I immediately whispered repentance, ashamed of my reasoning. Still, unease grew stronger. On the flight to Tehran, I replayed the cleric's words repeatedly. The closer we came to Iran, the heavier my chest felt, as if my soul sensed an approaching storm my mind could not yet see. I tried to calm myself through prayer, repeating familiar verses, but instead of comfort, I felt pressure building behind my ribs. Looking around the aircraft cabin, I noticed passengers resting peacefully while my thoughts raced uncontrollably. For the first time in my life, I admitted silently that I was tired of pretending certainty I did not feel. I did not want rebellion. I wanted peace. I wanted to know God without fear. As the plane descended toward Tehran, city lights appearing beneath us like scattered stars, an unexplainable dread settled over me. I told myself it was travel fatigue, diplomatic stress, anything logical. Yet deep inside, I sensed that something awaited me there, something that would confront every belief I had relied on for safety. And I had no idea that within days, a single moment, a single collapse during prayer, would shatter the fragile foundation of faith I had spent my entire life trying to protect. The night everything broke began like every other carefully arranged evening of the visit, structured and ceremonial, designed to display unity and reverence. Our delegation attended a formal gathering, followed by evening prayers at a grand mosque in Tehran. The building was breathtaking, its walls covered in intricate calligraphy that shimmered beneath soft golden lights. Cameras remained outside, but expectation followed us in. I adjusted my headscarf carefully, reminding myself to remain composed. Inside, the air smelled faintly of incense and polished stone. Worshippers stood shoulder to shoulder, their movements synchronized, a rhythm I had known since childhood. Normally, that familiarity brought comfort. That night, it felt suffocating. As the prayer began, I tried to focus on the words, repeating them from memory, but my thoughts drifted uncontrollably. The cleric's warning about doubt echoed in my mind. My heartbeat quickened. I told myself to concentrate, to surrender distraction, yet an invisible pressure tightened around my chest. When I bowed, dizziness swept over me. The floor seemed to tilt slightly. I inhaled deeply, hoping the sensation would pass, but instead, a wave of panic rose without warning. My breathing became shallow. The recitation around me grew louder, then strangely distant, as though I stood inside two realities at once. I had experienced anxiety before, but never like this. Fear flooded my body for no clear reason. Images flashed through my mind rapidly. Childhood lessons about punishment, warnings about dishonor, memories of suppressing questions, the constant effort to be perfect. Each memory struck like a heartbeat, faster and faster, until I felt trapped inside my own thoughts. I whispered a prayer desperately, asking God to calm me, yet the words felt hollow. My vision blurred, the lights above stretched into streaks. Someone beside me noticed my shaking hands, but before I could reassure them, the pain exploded across my chest. It felt as though an invisible weight crushed me downward. I gasped, unable to draw air. Panic turned into pure terror. I remember thinking, I am dying, and immediately afterward another thought followed. I am not ready. My knees weakened. The last thing I saw was the patterned carpet rushing toward me before darkness swallowed everything. But the darkness did not last. Instead, awareness returned in an unfamiliar way. At first, there was silence, absolute and complete. No sound, no pain, no fear. I felt lighter, detached from physical sensation. Slowly, I realized I could see, yet I was no longer lying on the mosque floor. Below me, people gathered in alarm. Voices overlapped in Persian and Arabic. Someone called for medical assistance. My body lay motionless among them, eyes closed, face pale. Confusion should have frightened me, but instead calm surrounded me like warm air. I watched as strangers attempted to help, their movements urgent yet distant, as if separated by invisible glass. Time seemed slower, stretched beyond normal understanding. I noticed details with impossible clarity. The trembling hands of a woman praying beside me, the echo of footsteps approaching, the flicker of lights above. Yet none of it touched me emotionally. The fear that had consumed me moments earlier was gone. I felt strangely safe. Then movement pulled my attention away from the scene. I sensed myself rising, drifting upward without effort. The mosque ceiling dissolved into darkness that quickly transformed into soft light. It was not a place I recognized, yet it felt familiar, like returning somewhere long forgotten. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. My childhood prayers, my secret questions, nights staring at the desert sky asking whether God truly saw me. Each memory appeared vividly, not accusing but revealing. I understood them differently now, as though someone else viewed them with compassion beside me. A realization formed slowly. I was no longer inside my body. The thought arrived without panic, only wonder. Below, the chaos continued, people rushing, voices calling my name. But distance grew between us, not physical distance alone, but emotional separation, as if earthly concerns no longer held power. Silence deepened again, peaceful and alive. I felt drawn forward by something unseen, a gentle pull stronger than gravity, yet completely comforting. For the first time in my life, I experienced existence without pressure or expectation. There were no titles here, no duties, no fear of failure, only awareness. As I moved further into the light, warmth surrounded me, and with it came understanding without words. Every hidden sorrow I carried seemed known. Every suppressed question felt acknowledged. Tears would have come if I still possessed a body. I realized then that I was no longer in the hospital or mosque, or even the world I understood. The environment around me shifted into brightness so pure it felt alive. Just as peace settled fully within me, a sudden awareness struck with overwhelming clarity. I was not alone. Someone else was there, waiting, watching with gentle patience. The realization filled me with both awe and longing. I sensed that whoever stood before me knew everything about my life. Every fear, every doubt, every silent prayer I had whispered into the night. The light intensified, forming a presence approaching slowly, and as understanding dawned within my heart, I realized with stunning certainty that I was no longer anywhere on earth at all. At first, I could not see him clearly. The light surrounding the presence was gentle yet brighter than anything my eyes had ever known, not blinding but alive, as if it carried emotion within it. I felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of being understood completely. The closer the presence came, the more my thoughts quieted until even my questions seemed unnecessary. Peace filled every part of my awareness, deeper than relief, deeper than happiness. It felt like coming home to a place I had searched for my entire life without knowing its name. When the figure finally became clear, I recognized him without being told. There was no introduction, no explanation, only certainty that settled inside me instantly. Jesus stood before me. He looked ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, human yet carrying authority that did not demand submission, but invited trust. His eyes held compassion so deep it broke something open inside me. I realized in that moment that I had never truly understood love until I stood in his presence. I expected judgment, exposure, perhaps anger for my doubts and confusion. Yet none came. Instead, I felt acceptance so complete that it dissolved every defense I had built around my heart. I wanted to speak, to ask thousands of questions, but before words formed, He spoke gently, and his voice felt both audible and internal, as if it reached directly into my soul. He said my name with tenderness I had never experienced before. Hearing it from him made me feel known beyond titles, beyond family expectations, beyond religion itself. Tears formed within my awareness, though I had no physical body to cry. I told him I was afraid, that I had tried to be faithful all my life yet felt empty. I confessed doubts I had hidden even from myself. Instead of correcting me, he listened. The silence between his words carried understanding. He told me I had always been seen, even during nights when I believed God was distant. He showed me moments from my life, childhood prayers whispered through fear, nights searching for peace online, silent questions spoken under desert stars. Each memory appeared surrounded by compassion rather than condemnation. Then the light around us shifted, expanding outward. The space transformed into scenes unfolding like living visions. I saw Iran, but not as I had witnessed it during diplomatic visits. I saw crowded streets filled with people searching, their faces carrying longing and exhaustion. Some prayed secretly in small rooms, whispering words unfamiliar yet filled with hope. Others cried alone, asking God to reveal truth beyond tradition. I sensed spiritual hunger rising quietly beneath political tension and religious structure. Jesus spoke again, explaining not with complex theology, but simple clarity. He said many hearts were searching for him, even where his name was forbidden or misunderstood. I saw gatherings hidden from public view, believers encouraging one another softly, risking rejection for faith. The vision shifted again. Darkness appeared, not as destruction, but as confusion. Fear, the division, uncertainty shaking nations. Yet within that darkness, small lights ignited one by one, representing people discovering hope through him. The lights multiplied slowly, spreading across cities like dawn, breaking after a long night. I understood without explanation that awakening would come not through power or violence, but through transformed hearts. Overwhelmed, I asked why he showed me these things. I was no preacher, no spiritual leader, only a woman raised to follow expectations. His answer was gentle, yet firm. He said I had searched for truth honestly, even when afraid, and that my story would become a bridge for others trapped between fear and longing. I protested, telling him the cost would be unbearable. I thought of my family, my culture, the consequences of speaking openly. He did not deny the cost. Instead, he showed me his hands, marked yet radiant, and I understood that love often required sacrifice but never abandonment. A warmth surrounded me stronger than anything before. Shame I carried for years dissolved completely. For the first time, I felt forgiven without needing to earn it. I realized my identity was not defined by perfection or obedience, but by being loved. The revelation felt almost too beautiful to accept. I asked if I could remain there, in that peace, away from fear and expectation. His expression softened with compassion. He told me gently that my time had not yet come. I needed to return. The words filled me with sudden sadness. I did not want to leave the presence that healed every wound inside me. Yet alongside sorrow came understanding. There were people I would meet, truths I would discover, and a story that needed to be told. He said many were praying for answers just as I once had, and my testimony would help them recognize his voice when they encountered it. The visions faded slowly, leaving only his presence and the surrounding light. I felt myself beginning to move backward, as though pulled gently away. Panic flickered briefly, and I reached toward him, afraid the peace would disappear. He reassured me with the final promise that I would never be alone again. His last words echoed deeply within me. "Speak the truth without fear, for I am with you." The light intensified one final time, warmth flooding my awareness, and then everything began to dissolve. The silence returned, but now it carried purpose rather than emptiness. As the brightness faded and distant sounds began to reappear, I realized I was being sent back to the world I had just left, carrying a truth that would change everything I thought I understood about God, faith, and the life waiting for me when my eyes opened again. Sound returned before sight. At first it was distant and distorted, like voices heard underwater. A steady beeping pierced the silence, followed by hurried footsteps and muffled conversations in languages blending together. My body felt unbearably heavy, as though gravity itself had doubled. Slowly, awareness settled into physical sensation. Cold air against my skin, dryness in my throat, pressure in my chest. I struggled to breathe, each inhale shallow and unfamiliar. Then light forced its way through my eyelids, and I realized I was alive again. The hospital ceiling above me looked painfully ordinary compared to the brilliance I had just left. For several seconds I lay still, unable to move, trying to understand where I was. Memories rushed back suddenly. The mosque, the collapse, the light, his voice. My heart raced, not from fear, but from longing. I wanted to return to that peace immediately. A doctor noticed my movement and called others into the room. Faces appeared around me, relieved yet cautious. Someone explained I had collapsed during prayer, and that my heart had stopped briefly before emergency intervention stabilized me. They used clinical language, careful and precise, describing oxygen levels and cardiac irregularities. I listened silently, nodding when expected, yet their explanations felt incomplete. They spoke about survival, but none of them knew where I had been. And none of them knew who I had seen. I wanted to tell them everything, but instinct warned me to remain silent. Even forming the words felt dangerous. Instead, I whispered that I felt tired and closed my eyes again, hiding the storm unfolding inside me. Peace lingered beneath my confusion, calm and steady, unlike anything I had experienced before. Fear, which once lived constantly beneath my thoughts, seemed strangely absent. Nurses adjusted equipment while security personnel waited outside the room. News of my collapse had already spread through diplomatic channels. I understood that every word I spoke would be monitored, analyzed, possibly reported, so I kept the experience locked inside my heart. That night, sleep refused to come. Each time I closed my eyes, fragments of the vision returned. The warmth of his presence, and the compassion in his eyes, the scenes of people searching for hope. I replayed his words repeatedly, afraid I might forget even a single detail. At moments, I questioned whether it had been a hallucination caused by trauma. Yet the peace inside me argued otherwise. Nothing in my life had ever produced such clarity or healing. Days passed as doctors observed my recovery. Physically, I improved quickly, astonishing the medical staff. Emotionally, however, everything felt different. Conversations around me sounded distant. Diplomatic concerns that once seemed important now felt insignificant. I smiled when required, answered questions politely, but inside I carried a secret too large to contain. During quiet moments, I felt overwhelming longing for the presence I had encountered. The absence felt almost painful, like separation from someone deeply loved. One evening, unable to resist curiosity any longer, I unlocked my private phone and hesitated before typing a single word into the search bar. Jesus. My hands trembled as results appeared. Articles, testimonies, passages from the Bible. Fear surged briefly, I glanced toward the door, ensuring no one watched, then continued reading. Stories described encounters similar to mine, people claiming dreams and visions that transformed their lives. Part of me wanted to dismiss them, yet another part recognized familiar emotions in their words. Late that night, I downloaded a Bible application, hiding it within a folder disguised among harmless apps. My heart pounded as if committing a crime. Growing up, the Bible had been presented as corrupted, unreliable. Opening it felt forbidden. Still, the curiosity overcame fear. I scrolled randomly, unsure where to begin, until my eyes landed on a verse highlighted automatically by the application. I read slowly, barely breathing. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." The words struck me with shocking intimacy. It felt as though the sentence answered questions I had never spoken aloud. Tears filled my eyes as understanding washed over me. Rest. That was what I had felt in the light. Not obligation, not fear, but rest. I reread the verse again and again, overwhelmed by the sense that someone knew exactly what my soul needed. For years, I had tried to earn closeness with God through effort and perfection. Yet these words offered peace freely. A quiet realization formed. I had not imagined the encounter. The same voice that spoke in the light seemed to speak through these words now. I quickly locked the phone when footsteps approached outside, my heart racing again. Fear returned, but it no longer controlled me completely. Beneath it lived certainty, growing stronger each day. I began reading secretly whenever I was alone, absorbing passages slowly, comparing them with everything I had believed before. Instead of confusion, clarity increased. The character of Jesus described in those pages matched perfectly with the presence I had encountered beyond death. Compassionate, patient, gentle yet authoritative. One night, after hours of reading, I whispered softly into the darkness, unsure whether I was praying correctly. I simply said his name. The room remained silent, yet peace filled my chest instantly, and confirming what my heart already suspected. I was no longer the same person who entered Tehran. Something irreversible had begun, and though I could not yet understand where it would lead, I sensed the path ahead would demand courage greater than anything I had ever known. The plane descended through a curtain of pale clouds as dawn spread slowly across the horizon, painting the sky in muted gold. Amira pressed her forehead against the window, watching the unfamiliar land appear beneath her. And for the first time since leaving home, she felt neither fear nor relief, only a fragile stillness she did not recognize. London stretched below like a living map, streets weaving endlessly, strangers beginning their mornings unaware that her entire world had collapsed and reformed within a single night. She remembered the moment she stepped past the airport gates back home, expecting hands to pull her back, voices to accuse her, but none came. Silence followed her instead, heavy and confusing, as if heaven itself waited for her next decision. The memory of the mosque still lingered vividly. The cold marble floor beneath her knees, the echo of whispered prayers, and the sudden overwhelming presence that shattered everything she believed about certainty. She had not planned to shout the name that escaped her lips. It rose from somewhere deeper than thought, deeper than fear, like a truth buried long before she understood language. Even now, she wondered if exhaustion had created the experience, if stress had fractured her mind, yet the peace that followed refused to fade. Peace had never stayed with her before. Now it always dissolved beneath expectation and duty. A flight attendant asked gently if she needed anything, and Amira realized tears had been sliding silently down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but the woman simply smiled with quiet kindness and moved on. kindness from strangers felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious, yet comforting. She clutched the small notebook hidden inside her bag, the one she began writing in after that night. Every page held questions she was afraid to ask aloud. Who was Jesus truly? Why had she felt seen instead of judged? Why did the fear of punishment disappear when she whispered a prayer she barely understood? The aircraft touched the runway with a soft jolt, and her heart raced as if crossing an invisible border between two lives. The airport buzzed with languages she could not follow, and laughter she did not share, freedom she did not yet know how to carry. Outside, cold air wrapped around her like a shock, stealing her breath. She inhaled deeply anyway, sensing that survival now required courage of a different kind, the courage to rebuild identity without the approval she once depended on. Days passed in a blur of unfamiliar streets and restless nights. She stayed in a modest apartment offered by a distant acquaintance who asked few questions. Each evening she replayed her past, wondering whether she had betrayed her family or finally become honest with herself. Guilt visited often, arriving quietly before sleep, reminding her of her mother's gentle voice and her father's unwavering expectations. Yet alongside guilt grew something stronger, a growing conviction that truth could not be undone once revealed. When one afternoon she entered a small church simply to escape the rain, the building smelled of wood and candle wax, and sunlight filtered through stained glass, coloring the floor in fragments of red and blue. She sat in the back, intending to leave quickly, but the silence felt alive, not empty. No one demanded anything from her there. No one watched to correct her posture or words. She closed her eyes and whispered a hesitant prayer, unsure whom she addressed, only knowing she was no longer alone. Memories flooded her mind. The collapse, the voice calling her toward light, the overwhelming love she could neither explain nor deny. Her breathing steadied as warmth filled her chest, gentle yet undeniable. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that faith might not be obedience enforced by fear, but relationship formed through grace. When she opened her eyes, an elderly woman nearby smiled softly without speaking, as if recognizing a journey invisible to others. Amira left the church carrying no answers, but a growing courage to continue searching. That night she wrote for hours, describing every emotion she had hidden for years. Words flowed faster than thought, releasing grief she never permitted herself to feel. She realized that transformation did not arrive as sudden perfection, but as daily surrender, choice after choice toward truth. Outside, city lights shimmered endlessly, indifferent yet beautiful. Inside her heart, something fragile began to heal. She no longer felt trapped between past and future. Instead, she stood at the beginning of a path she had never imagined walking. Fear still existed, but it no longer ruled her. Hope, quiet and persistent, had taken its place, guiding her forward into a life where faith would no longer be inherited, but discovered, step by uncertain step. The first confrontation came quietly, yet it struck like a storm breaking against glass. One evening, while reviewing reports in her private office, Amira's cousin entered unannounced. His expression was polite, but the weight behind his gaze carried accusation she could not ignore. He held her phone as though it were evidence of a crime. Amira's stomach dropped instantly. She recognized the applications and the browser history immediately, the traces of secret searches she had hoped would remain hidden forever. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to appear composed. "Amira," he said softly, almost conversationally, "we need to talk about this." The words, casual to anyone else, were loaded with implication. She nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of fear, shame, and defiance. Every instinct screamed to explain, to minimize, to deny. Instead, she remained silent, letting the moment stretch uncomfortably. In that silence, she realized the choice before her was clear. Yield to fear or speak truth. Memories of childhood rose sharply, stern warnings for imperfect recitation, nights trembling under the weight of religious expectation, a lifetime spent performing obedience rather than seeking understanding. But those memories, once chains, now reminded her of the courage she had glimpsed in the light, the peace that had filled her during the collapse. Her heart pounded as she finally spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "I have been searching," she said simply. "I have found something that changes how I see God. I cannot ignore it." The cousin's expression shifted, a mixture of disbelief and concern. He gestured toward the phone. "This could destroy everything. Our family, your position, your life here. Are you certain?" She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words, yet something inside her had been irreversibly transformed. "I am certain," she replied, each syllable deliberate. "Truth matters more than safety." For hours, arguments followed. He invoked honor, obedience, tradition. He described the shame her actions could bring upon the family name. Every threat, subtle or direct, felt like the walls of her former life pressing inward. Yet she remained calm, grounded by a presence she could not fully describe, a certainty deeper than fear. That night, alone in her room, Amira reflected on the tension between truth and safety. Her fear still existed, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. She remembered the vision of Jesus, his gentle assurance, his promise that love transcends expectation and judgment. Tears fell quietly as she recognized that the cost of faith would be high. Yet the alternative, returning to obedience without understanding, was unbearable. The next morning, news spread subtly through whispers among staff. Some questioned her choices openly, others observed silently, eyes wary. Isolation followed naturally, as people she once considered allies now kept distance. She walked through corridors with heightened awareness, noticing every glance, every half-spoken word. Yet she felt no bitterness. The peace that had accompanied her in the light now carried her through scrutiny and suspicion. She began to pray quietly each morning, and not out of obligation, but from longing. Words whispered into her room carried weight and intimacy she had never experienced before. Over time, a pattern emerged. Confrontation was inevitable, yet internal surrender brought freedom she could not have imagined. Flashbacks surfaced unbidden, childhood lessons about sin, punishment, and perfection. They no longer triggered fear, but illuminated the courage required to remain authentic. Amira realized that choosing Christ would demand public acknowledgement, that faith without risk was incomplete. She had glimpsed a life defined by obedience, but now she understood that obedience alone could never grant the rest and love she had encountered. Days grew into weeks, and the anticipation of a formal declaration weighed on her. The cousin remained both protector and adversary, the guiding subtly while maintaining scrutiny. Amira recognized the delicate balance between concealment and exposure, between preserving relationships and asserting truth. She knew the moment would come when silence was no longer an option, when inner conviction had to confront external expectation. Each night she prayed for strength, for courage, for clarity. She wrestled with guilt over family, loneliness from isolation, and exhilaration at the growth stirring inside her. Finally, she understood. The confrontation with tradition and authority was not merely external. It was a reflection of the inner battle between fear and fidelity. Choosing Christ would require courage beyond what she had ever imagined, yet she no longer doubted the path. The first steps had been taken, and the next would demand boldness, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to the truth she had seen in the light. When the day came to face a respected religious authority, Amira knew it was no longer a test of obedience, but a test of her soul. She would not deny what she had experienced. She would not allow fear to dictate faith. Every heartbeat carried the knowledge that, whatever followed, she was walking a path she could no longer abandon. A path defined not by titles or tradition, but by love, truth, and the God who had waited patiently for her awakening. The day of confrontation arrived quietly, almost deceptively, as if the world held its breath. I walked into the room where the imam and family elders awaited, my steps measured, my heart pounding but steady. Their faces reflected authority, judgment, and expectation, and for a moment, I felt the familiar weight of years spent performing obedience. The imam's gaze was sharp, scrutinizing every movement, every flicker of hesitation, yet I sensed something had shifted inside me. I no longer belonged to fear alone. He began with questions designed to trap me, to expose doubt and disloyalty. "Do you deny what you have learned all your life?" he asked, voice firm. "Do you reject the path your family and God have laid for you?" Memories of childhood recitations, of the fear of punishment for missteps, flooded my mind. I could feel the tension in the room, the weight of expectation pressing on my chest. But for the first time, I realized fear could no longer control me. My voice, though trembling slightly, carried conviction. "I have experienced truth," I said, looking each person in the eye. "I cannot deny what I have seen, what I have been shown. I cannot return to fear as my guide." A hush fell over the room. The elders exchanged glances, their authority momentarily challenged not by anger, but by calm defiance. The imam's lips pressed into a thin line, but his eyes softened just enough to betray uncertainty. He repeated his questions in various forms, testing my resolve, but I responded each time with the same quiet assurance. I follow what I know to be true. I follow the God of love, of mercy, of grace. My confession was not loud or flamboyant. It was simple, yet its simplicity carried weight no tradition could undo. Internal tension reached a peak as they attempted reasoning, warning, and even subtle threats. I felt their power, their influence, yet something greater filled me, a profound sense of freedom. The fear that had ruled me for decades was gone. Each word I spoke released chains I had worn silently. Each statement affirmed that my identity was no longer dictated by others. When the imam finally paused, silence stretched uncomfortably. I waited, heart steady, knowing the moment had arrived. I did not seek confrontation for pride or defiance. I sought truth and peace, and in that room for the first time my soul was unbound. The elders' faces reflected disappointment, confusion, and perhaps anger. But I did not falter. I felt the presence of the one who had shown me the path, the light that no earthly authority could extinguish. Forgiveness arose naturally within me, not toward those who opposed me superficially, but toward all who had tried to bind my soul out of fear, tradition, or misunderstanding. There was no revenge, no triumph over their authority, only release. I had broken free not by defeating them, but by embracing truth. Time stretched, and I realized the confrontation was not external alone. It mirrored the internal battle that had raged for years. Childhood fears, familial expectations, religious obligations, all dissolved in the certainty of love and guidance I had received. As the session ended, I rose slowly, each step deliberate. The room felt smaller now, constrained by authority that could no longer reach me spiritually. I walked past them, aware of fractured relationships and the social cost of my choice, yet unshaken. The air outside felt different, carrying a strange lightness I had not anticipated. Fear had lost its power over my decisions, my voice, my soul. I realized fully that obedience without truth was bondage, and courage without love was hollow. The world beyond that room might remain unaware of the transformation within me, yet nothing could remove the freedom I now carried. I understood that my story, my testimony, and my life were no longer controlled by tradition, expectation, or fear. The path ahead was uncertain, yet I walked it with a confidence rooted in what I had seen, what I had experienced, and the presence that would never abandon me. I stepped out into the hallway, unsure where I would go next, yet completely certain of the one who guided me. With every stride, I felt unshakable, unbound, and fully alive in the truth I could no longer deny. The world could react, judge, or isolate me, but internally, I had reached the point of liberation where fear no longer dictated my identity, and love, truth, and faith carried me forward into a life I had only glimpsed in dreams before. Amid the fractured remnants of my former life, I discovered a new family in the most unexpected of places. A small Christian community welcomed me quietly, their faces reflecting acceptance without judgment, warmth without expectation. I met online believers first, through hidden forums and private video calls, their words gentle yet filled with conviction. I shared my story in fragments at first, testing the water, feeling their empathy deepen with every confession. Their prayers surrounded me even when miles apart, creating a sense of presence I had never known within the cold walls of royalty or tradition. Slowly, I began attending secret gatherings, small groups in living rooms or rented spaces where scripture was read aloud and questions were welcomed. I listened more than I spoke at first, absorbing the rhythm of worship, the cadence of voices unafraid to express longing, doubt, and hope. For the first time, faith felt alive rather than imposed. Nights that had once been filled with fear became opportunities for reflection and prayer. I learned to kneel, not out of fear of punishment, but in gratitude for mercy I could now comprehend. My private Bible app became a companion, versus illuminating passages of life I had never dared to consider. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I read one evening, and my chest tightened with recognition. These words describe me exactly, the me that had wandered in silence, unseen and unheard. Healing was gradual but undeniable. The shame I had carried for years, the weight of perceived failure, the fear of dishonoring my family, softened under the relentless light of grace. Forgiveness became possible, first for myself, then for those who had sought to confine me with expectation. I prayed often for Iran, for the souls of people living in fear, for hearts hardened by tradition, yet secretly longing for truth. I remembered the visions I had seen during my collapse, the streets filled with seekers, the hidden believers, the flickering lights in the darkness. Those images gained clarity now, not as distant prophecy alone, but as a call to action. My heart swelled with a purpose that had been absent in my life of privilege, a mission not of power or wealth, but of sharing hope and testimony with those trapped in shadows. I realized that the collapse, the vision, and the subsequent journey had not been punishment but preparation. Each step, each risk I had taken to explore faith secretly had led me to this community of living hope. Slowly, I shared my story more openly, first with whispers, then in soft, deliberate words during gatherings. Listeners responded with empathy, tears, questions, and encouragement. I realized the power of testimony, not in argument or debate, but in the authenticity of lived experience. The fear of being discovered still lingered, yet it no longer ruled my actions. I had lost a kingdom of material security and social standing. But I had found life, full, liberating, and purposeful. In moments of solitude, I reflected on the journey, the collapse in Tehran, the vision of Jesus, the confrontations, the choices that had once terrified me. I understood now that each event had been a thread woven to lead me to this sanctuary, and to this new family bound not by blood or politics, but by faith and love. My prayers became intercessions, not only for myself, but for the countless others I could not see, trapped in silence, longing for hope. I realized that the story I had been given was not merely personal salvation, but a message to the world. That fear may bind, tradition may constrain, but truth, love, and courage endure. As I looked out the small window of my apartment one evening, city lights stretching like distant stars, I whispered a final prayer of gratitude. I had lost titles, status, and approval, yet I had gained something infinitely greater: freedom, purpose, and a living hope that could never be taken away. I closed my eyes, feeling the presence of the one who had walked with me through death, through fear, through uncertainty, and into life. And I was no longer alone. My story was no longer silent. And in that quiet peace, I understood fully. I had lost a kingdom, but I had found life.